joining Steemit Talk, and I'm your host, Winston Wolf. And sitting next to me, we have your co-host, Psycho Chica.
Hi.
And now, today we're going to touch on a few different topics. Today's going to be a little bit more of an upgrade from our pilot episode that you may or may not have seen. It didn't get a whole lot of attention, so I think right now we might have 20 likes on it, 20 upvotes or something like that on it. Yeah, it's pretty light, but we're trying to put our efforts into increasing our production value and everything. But now, along with us too, we've actually added number 3. We've got Gifted Gaia in the room with us.
Greetings, Steemit.
And this is our good friend. We have a pretty unique opportunity here because we all 3 live in the same city, so we can kind of get together and do these where we all seem to share the same level of excitement about doing this. So, and we're going to talk about everything Steemit. I don't know how technical we'll get as far as like the workings of Steemit and cryptocurrency and stuff, but I'm really interested in touching on, things I've seen at Steemit, different topics people have posted, conversations we've all, partaken in, and, just kind of help sort of enrich the community and try to answer questions that anybody might have. And so, yeah, I expect to see these. We kind of hope to do them kind of on the weekly. And so now we're going to talk about a few different things here. First thing is, of course, we'll probably go over to our friend Gifted Gaia. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, man.
Well, you guys know me pretty well. For the internet-based community, I'm a 37-year-old man. I've been on Steemit for approximately 48 hours, I believe. It seems to me to be a pretty interesting community, and I may talk more about that later. Obviously, the money aspect of it, or the earning potential, is there. That definitely makes your head turn as far as seeing a new social media network. But more so for me, it seems like that the people I've interacted with there so far have been real people. It doesn't seem like there's a wash of just fakeness there yet, as we've seen on other social media platforms. So that's really what's drawn me in initially, and I think I'm going to play for a little bit.
Word.
Have there been anything in particular that you've kind of posted on as far as your own interests or things that you've been searching for and found interesting out there?
Sure. I honestly haven't had a lot of time to peruse the website. I've kind of been trying to learn the ropes of it. From this point, the content that I would post would mostly be related to things that I'm interested in, my hobbies. I'm a musician, I'm a DJ, I like taking drone-based quadcopter photography, and I, of course, like funny memes and every other reason that we all go to the internet. So you'll find me in those corners of Steemit, I believe.
I gotcha.
Very cool. Yeah, and I kind of expect you to pop up a little bit more in photography now prior to buying your drone, I know personally you weren't that much into photography aside from perhaps the occasional picture you might take with your phone or whatever, but I've noticed you've really taken some pride in landscape photography, especially now that you've got that thing up in the air. I know I can tell you're a fan of sunsets, and the pictures I've seen of yours from that thing are just phenomenal.
Hey, thank you for your kind words coming from an outstanding photographer himself. Yeah, I mean, you get your camera up bird's eye view and it changes everything. You can see for miles. You put a wide angle lens on it, it gets even better. And we live in a beautiful part of the country, and it's kind of one of those things in your day-to-day driving from point A to point B. You might not notice you're stuck in traffic. You see buildings around you, but put a camera up in the air and you'll see how much vegetation, how many trees are here. This whole city is built in basically the middle of a bunch of woods, and it's very interesting to me. I like the views I've gotten so far.
I love that one you did from 4th of July, actually seeing the fireworks and stuff like that. I'd really love to see you throw that one up and kind of let others enjoy.
We'll be sure to add that one to the post here. By the way, that actually brings up a good point. Any person or any post that we mention or any sort of piece of media or anything like that, we'll be sure to include direct links so you guys can check all this stuff out as well. And I agree. That's that one, and there was another one of yours where I think you went to one of the local parks and kind of flew it around a little bit. And I don't know. I like that sort of Superman feeling that you get with flying that thing around sometimes. But as a matter of fact, I'm kind of hoping that at some point you'll be able to add some entries to the Steemit photo contest that I know they've got there every week.
I actually discovered that this morning, and I do have some just photos that I've taken to post to videos. I try to do that if I get the bird in the air and got some video going. I'll usually stop the video and try to snap a couple pictures if I see something pretty. I think I will plan on doing that. That's a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, thank you to Bernie Sanders and to Jam Taylor for starting that, because that's an awesome opportunity for any of the photographers around in Steemit to kind of get some exposure. And actually, Jam Taylor, I will be getting a hold of you. I would like to help you out with that contest at some point, because I think that's really interesting. So, and now let's see, what else were we going to touch on there?
Well, I did just want to ask Jason real quick if, with you kind of mentioning how you're still kind of learning the ropes and things like that, is there anything that you're still kind of, doesn't quite fit or make sense, or you're curious of how something works, or just anything along those lines?
Oh, I'm sure there's all kinds of questions I'll have as I become more proficient with the use of the site. I had to get a couple of different explanations as far as how the voting power worked, how the cryptocurrency translated into real dollars. Of course, where does that money come from? It's starting to make a little more sense to me now. You put me on the spot and I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
That's cool.
I would say for any new users out there, just have patience. This is, a Reddit-style social media platform, it seems to me, but it is certainly not Reddit. It's a little more complicated. The good news is it seems that there's quite a bit of content on the website itself as far as tutorials, how things work. And so that's nice to see. I realize this is a new social media platform, kind of just taken off here within the last few months. I'm anxious to see where it goes.
I think we all are, actually. That's kind of, everything is so new right now. Out of the three of us, I've been here the longest, which is equates to maybe just a couple of weeks. So I'm certainly not a pro by any means, but I want to try to answer questions, and I think that's kind of the goal overall as far as what we want to do with our little talk here, is to answer questions, which even if we don't know, we're going to find them out for you. We want to make sure that anybody who has any questions, make sure to reply to our post, ask those questions, so that next time whenever we have our show, we'll make sure to take the best questions and try to answer them, seek out answers maybe from some of the whales that you guys are familiar with. But yeah, absolutely. And there was actually one thing I ran into earlier today that I thought would be really cool to touch on, because I thought it was a really, really good point. Luke Stokes, you guys may have seen some of his posts around. I think he's got one that's, I don't know if it's trending yet. Actually, is there a way we can pull that up on there? Yeah, let's look up his name really quick. But he actually created a post which essentially talked about, I can't remember the title of it. We're going to pull that up in a second. But he was basically talking about how he had an issue where he had some back pain, and he wanted to kind of get some information from his peers and from his friends and family and things like that, to see if anybody might have had some input on what it could be, what could be causing the problem, what he could do to sort of to help his problem. He had some lower back pain that he'd been getting, and he was afraid it might be like a sciatic nerve or something. And here it is. The title of his post is "Social Media Cultures: Steemit, Facebook, and Change Over Time." And now basically what he was talking about was, he posed this question and he decided to do it on Facebook, where basically he asked his friends and his family that he had connections to on Facebook. He explained his issue, explained the pain that he was having, and perhaps what it could be and what he could do about it. And he got a whole bunch of very rich answers from his friends and family about this. And he started thinking to himself, would this have been as rich a learning experience by asking that question on Steemit rather than on Facebook? And it brings up the question of appropriateness whenever you're bringing up a question or bringing up a topic or something like that. And I find that really interesting, because I think he's absolutely right, where, if you have a particular question, are you compromising your reputation with your followers by asking specific topics or specific questions to your audience, rather than if you do it on Facebook? Your followers tend to follow you because you post specific types of things. And if you, out of the blue, just ask this weird question about back pain to your followers on Steemit, are you compromising your reputation with them? So what do you guys think? I think that's actually a very good point.
Well, being the new Steemit user, I'm not sure I can really speak to how Steemit would be better. I can only speak to my experience, which would be on the other social media platforms, which would be, let's say, Facebook. Facebook, you don't have followers, you have friends.
Right.
So in theory, that's only your friends. However, let's say in the example, in my case, I'm a musician, I've been a promoter, so I probably have 500 to 700 friends that might not actually be real friends in real life. So if I post it there, I'm not necessarily getting feedback from people who are following me specifically. It might just be just a general wash of the public. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it seems to me like the community that I've seen on Steemit so far is a lot more focused. It's a lot more real people versus just the general random people that you might get on, let's say, a Facebook, by example.
Mm-hmm. I buy that. In fact, yeah, it's interesting the kind of, I think anyway, as far as like the kind of interaction you get from people there, there's this incentive. I mentioned this in the last episode we had about there being an incentive. Well, of course, everybody knows what the incentive is. That's what brought you here in the first place. But basically, because of that incentive, it sort of forces people to look deeper into themselves and therefore deeper into the community as far as how to answer specific questions. People have a tendency, if they really, really want to, I feel anyway, want to make a difference in the Steemit community, they'll really reach deeply into their minds for a very good, well thought answer that, that actually makes sense and is relevant to the conversation, rather than, on Facebook, which I got to be honest with you, even though all my friends and family and everything are on Facebook, I kind of, lately I've been kind of avoiding it because of the election year and all the, the Pokemon Go frenzy. I'm just not into it at all.
It's getting pretty bad, in my personal opinion as well. And it goes through cycles. You'll see that as sports season hits, it'll be nothing but sports.
Oh my God.
If there's some song that's popular, I can't avoid it. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of getting back to what you guys were talking about as far as basically people kind of sharing themselves and being more real, and your kind of actual question as far as asking a question to your followers, being a problem or not, and sort of things, or does it impact you? And that's kind of one of the big real distinctions here is it really seems like, rather than trying to do a presentation on, say, Facebook, which for whatever reason is what seems to legitimize whether something is real or not nowadays, but a lot of people very much are using that kind of as a facade of what they're trying to present versus what they actually are. And when you scratch the surface of those mere presentations, there's really not a whole lot of substance behind it because it's an empty shell. It's just that front.
Right.
Now, when you move over to Steemit, where the incentive is to actually have substance, actually have essence, your presentation is no longer this image or picture that you're trying to present or maintain professionalism necessarily. It's about that sharing. It's about being as honest as you can to actually then foster those connections with others doing the same.
Right.
And again, psychologically, it kind of changes the game a little bit as far as, one, how people are actually approaching it themselves and what they're putting out, as well as now the ability of finding that, we'll just say, realness that's there.
Kind of a genuineness, yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd absolutely feel that way. And another distinction, too, that we have to make, and I'm sure somebody would mention this in the comments if we didn't mention it, on Facebook, and actually, Gifted Guy kind of did touch on this. I mean, you're talking to your friends and your family. So, I mean, there's a difference between people who are sharing a community with you and people who know and care about you. So, of course, somebody who actually has a legitimate concern about your health, they're going to be the quickest ones to look up that information to see. Now, granted, those relatives could end up on WebMD and try to diagnose you with some sort of terminal cancer just because you've got some sort of back pain.
Think of all of the things that you don't say on Facebook because your family members are there.
That's a good point.
That is a very good point.
I mean, how we changed our presentation on Facebook for our family, I'm sure we all do that. I mean, I know several people that have multiple pages just because they don't necessarily want their family to know who they actually are.
I'm raising my hand for that one.
Well, I know a lot of people in that boat, so
it's not meant as a knock. I mean, there's a practical reason for why they're doing it. But
sure.
It's different. Before I forget, I did want to mention, at least kind of give a shout out to HR1, Void, and more. I've had a great time so far in the Utopia discussion. I've kind of tried to consolidate what was said into a new singular post today. just so it can kind of stay organized and move forward. And I already saw HR1's kind of personal response to the larger question, like, kind of what their vision is and definitions, because we're not going to share the same thing. But anyway, I at least wanted to give a shout out. I'm really enjoying where it's going, and I kind of hope that it just kind of continues and builds, because they're just great ideas. Anyway, I don't want to go too crazy into the Utopia talk.
No, actually, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about another thread, which, to be perfectly honest, is probably not very active anymore, but it actually had a lot to do with free will and talking about whether or not we actually have free will. And I remember getting into that conversation talking about essentially, well, my main belief, and I think that's kind of a bad word, actually, belief. I don't like to get into that. My best idea, or the camp I typically tend to prefer to be with, the idea that I tend to accept here is that free will really just kind of depends on whether or not we have more, and again, this gets really philosophical, so I'm sorry for a lot of you who really don't want to get into this, but essentially I think free will kind of breaks down to whether or not the universe is made up of more than 4 dimensions, 3 dimensions and 1 time dimension, 3 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension rather, or more than that. If we have only 4 dimensions, I personally don't think we have free will. To have free will would require more than 4 dimensions. And as far as what I think the 4th dimension actually is kind of breaks down to a 4th dimensional object, or actually the 4th dimensional object, is pretty much the entire universe, from the birth of the universe to the death of the universe, kind of existing all at once, in the very same way that the top of an object in 3D space exists at the same time as the bottom. And
as above, so below.
As above, so below. Very, very, very good observation. And basically, if we were able to sort of experience the 4th dimension in that way, if in fact it actually does exist that way, we would experience our entire lives all in the very same instant, from birth to death. Everything, all the experiences, everything we have, we would experience all in the very same instant, because it all exists at once. And therefore, what we're experiencing, and I've actually heard somebody mention it this way, is that what we experience in the universe as time progresses is essentially the universe giving itself an MRI. And if that makes any kind of sense. Yeah, it's a really interesting thought. I kind of like that.
Well, it reminds me of something that Graham Hancock, who's an author and artist, something that he said. I saw a talk that he gave in, I think, 2000, in relation to how we as humans perceive time. And again, we don't need to go necessarily too far down the rabbit hole, but just touching on what you had said. He said if we were to perceive time the way that it actually does exist, we see things in the moment, in the second, right now, okay, the next second, okay, the next second. Well, what happened to that second previous and the one prior? Was that there? Did it happen? He said if we were to perceive time the way that it actually did exist, you would see your life almost as if a worm. As if the point you were born, your first year of life, your second year, as you zip around the country doing everything that you've ever done in the world, and then you die. And if we perceive time the way that it actually would be perceived, not the way our brains perceive it, that's what it would look like. It wouldn't look like this second and now the next second.
Sort of like an undulating snake. And I'm sort of infringing on copyrights using those exact words that way, but sort of an undulating snake that stretches essentially from your birth to your death.
Exactly.
And it sort of looks like this weird sort of centipede. Who was that? Was he a comic book artist?
He was.
What was his name?
Graham Hancock.
Graham
Hancock.
Graham Hancock.
Yes.
Okay, very cool.
It reminds me of the little water bubble-like structure from Donnie Darko.
Yes.
Kind of representing the time flow a little. I realize it needs to be longer, but for the short period of time, that's kind of the representation.
Not only does it need to be longer, but it also needs to encompass the entire shape of your body. So instead of just being sort of this tube that comes out of your chest, it would actually be every single atom of you that exists.
I've got some background as far as these kind of general questions, and as well as kind of getting into physics and stuff like that. I'm enjoying all the analogies here. I need to kind of digest them and kind of go through before I have something specifically on that. But
I have another analogy for you when you're finished, actually.
One of the ones that I kind of ran on for a long time was, we have the picture of the Earth, say, just going around the sun.
Right.
Well, normally it's that snapshot of a singular round Earth around a singular sun.
Right.
Now, when you start applying that fourth or time dimension to it, just the concept of world lines, of think of, now it's that blurred Earth going in these spirals and the sun going around its own little spirals.
And then you've got the moon going around in a spiral around the spiral of the Earth, yeah.
It's no longer just this, we're here right now, it's encompassing the entire flow of that as well. It's not a perfect, but it was it's one of those ways that I've kind of stored or tried to view some things like that. I need to get back to just my take on free will here in a second, but one other thing I wanted to mention is there's a book called Flatlanders.
Yes.
Where they were basically they were trying to kind of answer the question of, well, what does a higher dimensional object look like to us? If we were to, say, have a fourth spatial dimension object.
Isn't that usually when somebody posts a GIF of the Tesseract?
Somewhat.
Okay.
What they did in this book to kind of give some visualization, because we really can't consciously think in higher dimensionality. It becomes kind of abstract because there's nothing physical that we can refer to, because we don't physically interact with those other dimensions in that way. We're not sensitive to it anyway.
I will, however, say that Albert Einstein even said that imagination is more important than knowledge. So if you can imagine it, then chances are you can probably get yourself on the right track of what it actually is.
I mean, in my primitive brain, I would guess that would be some sort of dream state at best. That's as close as we can probably get.
As a photographer, I have to kick in with my photographer brain here. I think you can actually take a picture of the fourth dimension with an extended shutter speed. Specifically, as a matter of fact, I've actually been able to post pictures of like traffic streams and things like that.
It's that kind of blurred motion, essentially,
right,
where you're seeing a singular object kind of spread across multiple spatial points on the frame. But before I lose my point real quick, on the Flatlanders, what they do is tell you, imagine a piece of paper, a flat piece of paper. To the beings living on that is the entire world. They live in a 2D world where there's, forward, back, left, right, but the concept of up, down, off the paper does not exist. So what would a three-dimensional object, we'll just say like a ball, look like to someone on that piece of paper, a Flatlander?
It would look like a two-dimensional object.
Right. So what they would see is basically a dot showing up out of nowhere, getting bigger to the point of being the circle, which is, the largest point of the ball going through, and then going back down to a point and then disappearing.
If it's a ball.
If it's a ball. Like, say, an unpoppable bubble, or however you want to view it.
I think I've seen the analogy that has been used before was a balloon.
Same idea.
Yeah.
So, to then extend that to us, if we were to experience a fourth dimensional object, it would be the equivalent of a beach ball popping out of nowhere over here in the kitchen and flying across the room and then suddenly disappearing into nothingness.
There's a kitchen in this studio? Where's this kitchen at?
Somebody make me some bacon.
I'll take some bacon.
Just to bring us full circle here.
Do we have to tag bacon? Does somebody have a bacon thread we can link in here?
Well, the original point here was kind of a free will, and I at least just kind of wanted to give my quick...
The only point I got out of this whole conversation was bacon.
For me, the question ends up coming down to, if you believe that there's not free will, that there is basically a very specific track of deterministic things, which basically means you can line every single step up from the beginning of time to now, that caused this to happen. And I don't really see that being the case. I mean, we have tendencies, we have drives, we have things that we prefer and shun. Some of it's just our biology of we react to hot and cold because that's how we work.
Now, having said that, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut in here, but I think that a lot of that depends on whether or not the way we feel is also part of that fourth dimensional object. If all we have are four dimensions, one of two things are happening here. Either we've got an entire eternal object that exists all simultaneously from the very beginning to the very end, which therefore would mean that everything's already determined. We're just sort of sliding along this object in our sort of bubble of immediacy that we call the present moment that sort of slides down this object. Then the feelings that we have and the choices that we make are built into it. So it's not. If that's the case, that's one thing. But if we have more than 4 dimensions, then more than one fourth dimensional object that we call eternity would exist.
Well, here's kind of my take on that is, and this is just my personal thing, so I'm not trying to be dogmatic.
Sure, no, there's nothing dogmatic about this at all. Everybody's got their own interpretation.
I kind of view it as there's that, I just label it a subconscious part of us that's just kind of there all of the time, whether you want to refer to it as the soul or the permanent part of us that goes back into everything else. That's kind of the more, passive state that I think you're referring to, as far as it not necessarily being free will. You are what you are, and you're just now interacting with things. However, I think once we kind of gain consciousness, this ability to think outside of the moment, which is really to me what consciousness is, you now are able to override those kind of triggers, those reactions that you have to things, and over time actually change those instinctual reactions.
The observer observing.
Essentially. I mean,
that's cool.
We as a race are kind of programmed to kind of be afraid of just about anything that's big moving towards us that's over our eye level. We outgrow this after we're about 4 or 5, but that's why big trucks or big sounds freak you out as a kid automatically. It's ingrained because usually that used to mean danger.
Beware of snoo-snoo.
Well, and anything unknown in general, which is where I think the fear of the dark might come from. And then eventually, over time, we sort of, embrace the darkness because we know that there's nothing really to be afraid of.
Well, there were predators at points.
True.
I mean, at those points where we were having to have these behaviors ingrained just to even let us survive as a race, if you're not afraid of something growling at you in the dark, you're probably not going to continue for long.
So I think we've come full circle here, and we figured it out that for any of the listeners, spoiler alert: Steemit is the 4th dimension.
Steemit is the 4th dimension.
I think it should be the phi dimension or pi or some sort of irrational number, just to add to the joke.
Well, in all this conversation, as far as the free will and the dimensions that we're experiencing, how we as humans react to the environment around us, all this started with basically the mention of your Utopia post. And I just want to go back to that real quick. I've read that post. I think it's a great post. I've read the comments. I think there's a good conversation going there. The name of that post, for anybody interested in following up, is How to Make a Small Utopia, and Steemit might be able to help. And again, the username there is Psycho Chica.
I think we actually posted this in our last talk. So yeah, we'll make sure to post our last episode on here. So if you're interested, you can also find it there as well. But yeah, absolutely.
Just to finish up my kind of free will sort of thing here is with consciousness, it changes the rules a little bit. To me, that's the benefit of it. It allows you to take that passive state or subconscious that just is. Everyone's got, I believe, some underlying personality. There might be nothing, but it's a boring discussion, so I like this one better. But when you now have that attached to a biological body that has deficiency needs, it gets hungry, it gets thirsty, there's things that it has to do, and you put consciousness on top of it, I can feel like freaking out on somebody or wanting to hit somebody and not do it. There's you can see it in just your daily life where your instinctual reaction is not the chosen action when it's said and done. So over time, you can change those instinctual behaviors, like just the way that you react to things as far as, does this person really mean that, versus, oh my God, they're horrible. Just listening behaviors. But I mean, it goes a long way, and I really that's where I end up seeing the free will aspect come into this. And I do believe we have a passive nature. I think that there's a state that we're always in that's updating, as far as how we react to certain things. And I think it's our consciousness that gives us the mechanism to actually allow that update to happen versus just always being that passive state indefinitely.
Actually, Gifted Guy, I know you had a question here, so go ahead and I'll I'll keep my thought, but I'm gonna come back to that.
Well, not even so much a question, it's just kind of a follow-up to that. We've talked about the word feeling several times, how we feel about something, and if we were just to break that down scientifically, feelings is specifically just a chemical that's being released in your brain, and your body in its physiology is reacting to that. Anger, sad, love, whatever it is. So we have those preset environmental conditions where I feel cold, and so there's a reaction. I need to get some warm clothes on so I don't freeze to death. We know that's what the outcome would be. But I also think that falls back onto where you hear some of let's say like a monk type mindset where they're talking about mastering the self. One of the things that I've been doing here for the past couple months is intermediate fasting. And specifically what that is you basically try to control the windows in which you eat. Not necessarily what you eat, but when you eat. And there's a line of thought that came behind it. I discovered this via watching mixed martial arts and being really into those podcasts. And of course, all those people are world-class athletes and they have professional nutritionists that help them with their diet. And I kept hearing intermediate fasting come up. And basically, if you don't eat right at the beginning of your day, it allows your body to burn its own stored fat, as opposed to you getting into the habit of just needing a big breakfast, and boy, if you didn't get that breakfast today, now you're really hungry. So
which actually, that actually brings up a thought that I had where you talked about where essentially the body sort of feeds on its own reserves after a while. That would explain why if I'm hungry, if I wait for 20 minutes, I won't be hungry anymore because it's gone over to the reserves.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly. And part of what we were just talking about, just to kind of close my point here, is just when you talk about like the master who makes the grass green, who is the master that makes the grass green? Well, we all live on this planet. We're all subjective to our environments, and we have conditions that we have to meet to survive. And at the same time, if I'm hungry, I definitely have the option to not eat. And part of what helps me with that is just the perspective of, boy, there's a lot of people on this planet that didn't get to eat breakfast today. They didn't have that choice. So just by me making that choice, I then become the master that's making that grass green. I'm controlling that. And in reference to anything that we've talked about so far, I think that when you get into that mindset of being the observer that's observing yourself, and you have control of things that are just natural reactions that you normally would just fall into whatever the habit is, but now all of a sudden you're aware of the habit, you have a chance to break that habit. You have a chance to control it.
Just one funny analogy that comes to mind out of all of this is, so if you wait about, if you feel hungry and you're able to make yourself not eat for 20, 30 minutes, then it kind of kicks off its own process to fix the problem, and you can go about your merry way, either eat or not, but regardless.
This is why anorexics a lot of time are so successful at being anorexics, because they realize if I'm hungry, if I wait for 20 minutes, but then if they keep doing it after a while, they cause some serious damage. I
just find the connection to the voting algorithm on Steemit of, if you want it to be effective, you have to wait 20 to 30 minutes after the post is made.
And we come full circle, my friends. We talk about Steemit and the technical workings based on how we feel when we decide, you know what, I could really eat a cheesecake right about now.
Somebody please upvote this cheesecake idea.
I think it's pretty much all we've got here for today. If there's questions or anything else anyone wants, or
Well, yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to Ace108, user Ace108. Posted a drone sunset video earlier, and this person responded that they used to live in this state, but on the other end of the state. And they made the comment of, wow, that's neat. I've never seen the sunset from this angle of the state before. And I thought that was A, a clever comment, and B, just another example of how this community can really tie people together. I'm not sure where this person is now, but that really made me smile this morning, so I appreciate that comment.
Oh, I think I saw that. He was talking about how he used to live in Missouri. He didn't live there anymore. I wonder where he is now, but that's cool. I'm actually really excited to find out that we've got a bunch of people who were either currently living in Missouri or used to live in Missouri. I think the Midwest has a lot to offer to Steemit.
Well, and I spoke to a friend last night that's in South Africa.
Oh, wow.
I was selling him on this so badly, saying you live in an area where I'm not sure the user base there, but I'm guaranteeing you it's not a lot. And you also have a perspective of a lifestyle, of a culture. If you're to start snapping pictures of the world around you, I mean, his post would stand out.
Give that man a camera.
I'm trying.
I'll just throw out here, if anyone has ideas of a picture you would like from South Africa, like something you just like a picture of from someone there, say what it would be. We can have him, like, they just got a Burger King. That was their brand new thing, and he was upset because it tasted just like a Big Mac. But
well, and it's so funny to hear the differences in the culture because
absolutely.
what's completely normal to me is something new and exciting to him. Oh my gosh, we got a Burger King! So
Wow.
yeah.
Well, right on. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I think we've had a pretty good episode this time, and expect more stuff like this. We plan on getting things much more, we're going to raise the bar here. We want to make sure our production value keeps going up, or, we want to make sure that we discuss everything that we possibly can. If anybody has any questions, be sure to ask. We want to make sure to seek answers and make sure that everybody's as informed as they can be when they come here, because I think everybody's got an incredible opportunity. You can, really put forth effort to this community, and it'll scratch your back if you scratch its back. So it's, I don't know. Yes.
Well, and just to speak on that, not to drag this out any longer, but one of the things that really drew me to this, it wasn't even necessarily the objective of getting money. It was, what if you achieve whale status? You have the power to change somebody's life with a click of a mouse, and that really boggles my mind a little bit. I think that's just a great thing. And any whales listening out there, I mean, this isn't a ploy for help, but seek out those people that are asking for help that really you can tell they need it, and change their life. That's an amazing thing that the internet and the Steemit-based community has offered the option to do for people. That's wonderful.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. All right. Anything else to offer? Or are we?
no, I'm pretty much babbled out at this point.
Well, very good. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you again. This is Steemit Talk, and I'm Winston Wolf.
I'm Psycho Chica.
And I'm Gifted Gaia.
We'll see you next week.